Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Thank you for joining the Empowerment Zone. I am your host, Ramona Houston. Welcome to my podcast. I'm so excited about our guest this morning. She is Tracey Greene-Washington, all the way from the Carolinas. And we are so excited to have her today. She was introduced to me by a friend on my network on LinkedIn, and she and I got to know each other. And I must say, a few weeks ago on a phone call, a virtual meeting, and we just immediately hit it off. We're now sisters, and just sisters in the movement, sisters in the cause, sisters in being and doing purposeful work. And so I'm excited to have her. She is president of the Indigo Innovation Group, which is a consulting firm dedicated to serving as a strategic thought partner, advisor, and consultant to philanthropic organizations, as well as nonprofit and for-profit organizations committed to accelerating change through system-level approaches, equity, and strategic collaboration, which is really exciting work, especially in the moment that we're living in terms of combining and collaborating with various sectors to create social change and social impact. She's also founder of CoThink, a social change philanthropy organization committed to shifting the economic, mobility, health, education, and leadership narrative of communities of color in Western North Carolina through strategic investments, network building, and civic discourse. And amazingly, she also did a TED Talk where she addressed, entitled Addressing Complex Social Change. And you're talking about today's world is about complex social change. I was attending the United Nations Global Compact Conference this week, Monday and Tuesday, and one of the main theme was businesses and the corporate community being leaders in advancing change, that we can't just depend on government and nonprofits, that business leaders also have a critical role to play in solving local, as national, as well as global challenges. And so Tracey is right in the thick of that work. As a social impact strategist myself, it is great to see another person who is looking at approaching social change from a strategic point of view, from a multicultural, multiracial point of view, and as well as a multi-sector point of view. So welcome, Tracey. It's great to have you this morning. You look great.
Thank you. You look great as well. I'm glad to be with you, particularly as we are all navigating this important moment in history. And so it definitely is an honor to be able to have this conversation with you.
Well, tell our audience, we're primarily in this podcast, as you know, focused on the empowerment of the African American and Latino community, Latinx community, Black and Brown communities. And we know you do work with both of those communities, but that your work really primarily focuses on empowerment. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work and your professional evolution, and tell us more about what you do now?
Yeah, I think that whenever someone talks about themselves, for me, I always have to start at the beginning.
Start at the beginning, man.
So this work of really talking about complex social change and really understanding my role and commitment to it really started at a really young age, at the age of 16. I actually began this work as a community organizer with the NAACP in Asheville, North Carolina. And I remember leadership sending us out to do door knocking. But we didn't know what that was. We were just following the guide, the vision, the passion of leaders in our community that wanted to do something different, that they wanted things to look different, feel different. And they included us as a part of the next generation, as a part of seeding both their legacy, as well as ensuring that we had the foundation that we needed to move forward. And so I always start there because that is the foundation for my work. That is the foundation for the lens which I view my work, particularly as I think about my work over the trajectory of my career. There's been a focus of understanding that the lived experiences of community are important. That if you stop and listen to community, that they have the solutions, that you create space for voice for folks, that it actually creates long-term impact. And if you figure out how to both share and build power in community, it can be amazing what can be produced from that. And so that really has been the impetus for my career, and really created a firm foundation for how I've continued to do my work as I move forward. I start there and then I transition to quite a bit of my work over the last 20 years have really focused on the nonprofit sector and also the philanthropic sector, with a significant amount of that being in the philanthropic sector. One of the things that I learned early in my career, being on the nonprofit side of things, was this question of really wanting funders to understand, how do you do this work in partnership with community, and not feeling like I had the ability or the opportunity to share that perspective. So when I had the opportunity to kind of move into the philanthropic sector, I brought that lens to the work and really figuring out, how do you actually be a partner with community as a funder that is looking at resources and use that as a way to really create authentic, real, healthy, positive, and equitable relationships between community and these institutions that have to be partnership in really solving these complex issues. That really has guided my lens in terms of thinking about this work from an ecosystem approach, that we all have our role to play in this work. And if we're not playing our role, then we better get out of the way. Mm-hmm. And so much of my work, as I think about fast forwarding it in terms of my career, has been this focus and this desire to figure out how I can address systems change and complex social change by both supporting leaders who have these big, audacious dreams that are working in systems, and also working to innovate spaces that have yet to be seen and yet to be created as well. And figuring out in that moment and in between those pieces, how do you support individuals and people to be compelled to build leaderful organizations? And when I talk about leaderful organizations, that means that everyone in the organization and everyone doing this change work has the ability to work at multiple levels to tap into their leadership, to tap into their voice, to be strategic in the design and co-creation of solutions with community without necessarily having to ask for permission, that we are trusting that everybody is leading and anchoring their work from a specific place. And by trusting that we have the ability for everyone to step into their power to be able to support and to catalyze change as we move forward.
What did you call that term again?
Leaderful organizations. And that didn't come from me. That actually came from the president of the Kellogg Foundation, Lejeune. She is a powerhouse. She's doing some amazing work. And if you have the opportunity to look at the model that Kellogg has done, they've done this evolution of talking about their work and really understanding that if everyone has the ability in an organization to be able to move as a leader and be listening to community, it allows them to both be proactive and also to be more impactful in their work as they move forward. And so I've really adopted that as a way of figuring out, how do I support folks who are doing this work in a really intentional way.
Yeah, I like that term, and I like the concept of the term, that everybody can contribute to the change process and be partners in change. I want to go back to your work with philanthropic organizations and getting them to see communities as partners. What did you see was the main challenge of how philanthropic organizations looked at communities without necessarily listening to their voices? What were the challenges with that?
I think one of the things is the history in which philanthropy was founded on, and really having this lens of looking at their partnership with community as a charity, as opposed to really an authentic partnership that can support transformational change. And so those organizations that have not and been challenged to shift from this charity mindset that we are giving something to you, that we're gifting something to you, as opposed to it being a partnership that we're co-creating, we're co-designing. And I, Philanthropy, see you, community, as the expert around these solutions in your community, because you are the one living the experience. You're the one guiding the experience. You're the one having the lived experience that really can help us figure out what are the biggest return on investments in your community based upon the priority areas that make sense as you move forward. So the biggest piece is that shift from this charity mindset to really this transformational mindset.
So how has that experience been for you and for leaders that come from that paradigm of not charity, but partnership and collaboration? And how has the work been for you in terms of change? Because that's a mindset change. That's a culture change because philanthropic organizations have always looked at, we know the solutions to your problems, and they don't even have the lived experiences of the communities they are attempting to assist. So how has it been for you and others who are having these conversations with philanthropic leaders and organizations?
I think the beautiful thing about philanthropy in this moment and probably in the last several years is that philanthropy has begun to understand that you have to move and operate in a different way to really have the type of impact that they want to have towards achieving their mission and the outcomes that they seek. And because of that, I think for me personally, I've been pretty lucky that, I really believe that like attracts like. And so I've had the opportunity to be in partnership with some philanthropic institutions where we share the same values, to share the same goals, and have given me a level of room to be innovative and to test out what that really means in community and ask hard questions, both of the institution and also of our practices. And also, how do I begin and continue to work and evolve as a leader in supporting that in an intentional, authentic way as well? That work can be painful, right? As a woman of color, being in an institution that have had roots in resources that have oftentimes been accumulated as a result of practices of white supremacy and racism that have disadvantaged people of color, and then working in those institutions to repurpose those resources for the good. Definitely for individual purpose, from an individual perspective, definitely calls you to continue to do your work and also to use your voice in a very intentional way as well. Those spaces can be both exciting to be able to support and be a bridge and weaver between communities that often don't have access to resources. And it also honestly it could be a challenging space as well, particularly if you're bringing a perspective in that people may want, but may not know how to live into that. Mm-hmm. And so for me, as a woman of color walking in that space, I've had to embody that in my walk, in my language, in my practice, that has at times rubbed up against the status quo and rubbed up what the traditional culture has been. And yet I also have been able to have really important allies who've walked alongside me to support me in these unique approaches and ways to do the work in a way that's countercultural to ways that it has been done in the past. Mm-hmm. So I think that much of this has been that I've had the opportunity to find like allies and like organizations. And when I felt like those weren't the right organizations, I was able to transition and evolve and grow and move to organizations as well. But one of the things that I'm really clear about is in my role in any place that I go is about influence. It's about influence in folks' thinking towards moving, influencing feelings to moving their actions.
That's a great perspective. Now, when you look at the challenges of working with philanthropic organizations, you discussed many of those challenges in working to change the mindset, the culture, and the operation of how those philanthropic organizations serve the community. Let's flip that and talk about some of the challenges you have working with grassroots organizations and community organizations. I know you work in both the Black and Brown communities. What are some of the challenges you see in terms of working with them and kind of showing them or working with them on how to work with philanthropic organizations?
I tell you, I love working with Brown and Black communities, communities of color, Indigenous communities. You know, one of the things that's really beautiful about our communities is that we know. We do know. We know what the solutions are. We know how to move that work forward, and we know how to work in a way with the secret sauce, the secret ingredient that no other communities, know how to do, right? And so what's beautiful about the work that I've been able to do with African American and Latinx communities is that it's first of all seeing them, right? One of the things, people always ask me how Co-Think was birthed. And Co-Think was birthed out of seeing all this amazing work that was bubbling up from communities of color in Western North Carolina. And seeing that the communities were doing this innovative work that no one else was doing. But the work was working in silos. It wasn't connected. And really understanding that they wanted to scale the work in a way that makes sense for them, but not having the resources of the platform or the voice to be able to do it. And I think so much of the work that I've seen in terms of the challenge is, particularly around the Co-Think work, is being able to work with community and for them to see themselves as philanthropists. So philanthropy is not new to our community.
Yes.
It started in the churches. Yes. It started with mutual aid with our neighbors, sharing food, sharing resources. Yes. So we've always been philanthropists. And so I think one of the biggest things biggest challenges is for us to lean back into our history and accept that we are philanthropists, and we can redefine the language of what a philanthropist is. Because the reality is many grassroots folks have been doing that work, have had different experiences from the traditional philanthropic arena that has not always been positive. Mm-hmm. And so that image and that notion of how you define philanthropy in some ways has created a challenge to folks redefining it for themselves. And it's not even a redefining, it's going back to what we already know.
Yes.
And tapping into that language and saying, hey, I am a philanthropist, and I know what that means in my community. I know what it means from a historical perspective. I know what it means, how my aunties showed up and my elders showed up in community. And I too can tap into that and move that forward as in the way that makes sense for me. And that's the beautiful thing about Co-Think. We have a motto. We can do what we want to do. We have the autonomy of our resources, and we can invest in ourselves through our time, talent, and treasure in a way where we're not asking permission from anybody else. And so that even that notion of asking permission to be able to do what needs to happen in your community and to use your resources in a way that makes sense, I think is one of the beautiful things that I've seen bloom in this work, particularly working around social change philanthropy, as opposed to from this more traditional lens of a philanthropic institution. And so I think some of the beautiful things and the challenges at the same time that I'm seeing community grapple with is how do you step into that role and keep your authentic voice? How do you step in that role and make sure that you're anchoring it in the values that make sense for your community, and you're not duplicating what you've seen in a more traditional setting that then creates harm and trauma? And so in the work with Co-Think, we're constantly assessing, is this causing harm or are we helping?
Mhm.
Are we duplicating something that we said we didn't want to duplicate? And we need to hold ourselves accountable in a different way. What is a different way that we can do this differently? And I have to say, for me, being able to be in this space of innovation is really important, because I really think when you talk about systems change, I think of it in three buckets: that you're working within the systems where you're trying to make it work better, to improve it, the coordination around it, different parts talking to each other better to serve people in a certain way. And then I think it's this work in systems change where you're working on the fringes of systems, where you're not exactly directly in system, but you're pushing the system with other models, other institutions, other perspectives to help the system begin to think about this work in a different way. And then you have this third bucket of work around systems change, which I talk about is innovation, where you can just try everything in the kitchen sink in service to creating new models, new ways of thinking, new solutions that you then introduce into the system for them to have new models, for them to think about as a proposition of making the system better or interrupting and reimagining the system.
Yeah, I really like your concept about that 3-point system. We always had this debate among African American activists: is where are you going to be? Are you going to work in the system, right? Are you going to be our mayor? Are you going to be our CEO of a great company that does philanthropy? Are you going to be a lawyer? What are you going to do? And then some of us were saying, well, I'm not going there. I'm going to be on the ground in the community, pushing systems, right? Working outside of the system. And then your third bucket, which I never recall having this conversation, but I really like that: the innovation, the one who changes and creates new ideas and new models. And we see that going on today, right? With various these three buckets. And
we all have a role to play in it, right?
Yes.
And so much of my work at this moment in time in my career is helping folks wherever they choose to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to a few conversations. A couple of points that you made, but we're running out of time. So I want to talk about, just briefly, what you think about what's going on today with COVID, with the murder of Black people, and it's finally come to light. And this is something we've known all along, right? This is a lived experience. We culturally have survival mechanisms, right, that help us in the Black community to try to avoid situations like that has happened. But sometimes we can't avoid it, right? But we in our own communities know these things exist. But now it's all of a sudden becoming is in the public eye due only to the phone. The phone is what brought it to light. And so I just want to get, just for a few minutes, just get your points of view about what's going on today and our work and what we need to do as racial and social justice change advocates in your perspective.
Yeah, I think that this is an important inflection point in American history. It's a global moment. It's a global movement where people are saying that the systems that have been in place no longer work for us, and we will not go back to them. Mm-hmm. The beautiful moment about COVID, and I think folks will have different ideas about this. I don't know if the moment of the movement that happened after COVID could have happened without COVID. Mm-hmm. Yeah. COVID forced folks to slow down in a way and pay attention mm-hmm. and stop making excuses and to take care of themselves in some ways that allowed them to be fully present to what was happening. And in COVID, we began to see those things that are often invisible really emerge, and the light shine on it, of the disparities from a racial perspective, of the have and have-nots, from the wealth, gap, to all these different issue areas that were bubbling up as people were trying to move from a health perspective and who has access to those resources, why, right? In terms of education, to job, employment, to just making sure people have the basic necessities of being able to feed their families. And when people began to see in a very short amount of time when COVID started, that people were standing in these long lines to really be able to feed their families, you begin to see the reality and the truth about how fragile and how many people were really living on the fringes. And what the system was creating in our community where folks were not thriving, let alone being resilient, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think in this moment, it is an inflection point where everything that was invisible is being visible. And people are having to make a choice about what they choose to see and what they have to do in this moment. For CodeThink, we issued a solidarity statement talking about this moment. And it leads in with this quote from Rosa Parks, of talking about really being clear about what you stand for in this moment. And that what is blooming right now is the nuts that were planted from yesterday for the oaks that need to stand for today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that this moment is our moment to reimagine, to interrupt the systems, the structures that has created conditions and a world that no longer works for us. It has no place in terms of how we've been operating. And so as I think about this moment going forward and seeing the beauty of all the young people that are serving as important catalysts for this work, it has to be an intergenerational movement. It has to be a movement that is multiracial. And it has to be a movement where allies understand their role in this work. I think one of the things that I'm seeing as a trend is people are saying, we got to do something now. The reality is that a lot of people who want to do something now haven't done their work. You have to do your work at all levels of oppression. You have to do your I work, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. Your intrapersonal work. You have to do your we work, the interpersonal work, your relationships with others. You have to do your structural work in terms of structural analysis of what's working and currently in your current context, and create a vision of how you will shift that. And you have to be clear about your walk, how you will walk in a relationship with community, be an ally, and be accountable to this work as we move forward. And the reality is that we have these folks and these groups that are really excited about this moment, which they should be. They're compelled to act. And yet what I need for them to do, and what we need for them to do, is to do their work, because this is a long-term game. Yes. This is not a sprint. Yes. And we need folks to be at their best and showing up as their best to do this work. And if folks have resources, there are many organizations that have done their work, then they need to transfer that over to them. They need to give those resources and assets to this community so they can do their work. Yes. Folks need to be doing equity audits. Folks need to be talking and having honest conversations and building their muscles around awareness and analysis that can move them to action. And organizations and philanthropic organizations need to be building endowments led by people of color organizations, and they have to be issuing unrestricted resources for these organizations to do this work in a deep way.
Yes, and I'm glad you stated that, because in terms of doing the work, doing the work internally and doing the work in terms of how you operate, because you're a part of the system as an individual, and then you're a part of the system as a collective, but also your final point about philanthropy and the importance of people of color being able to determine how dollars will be used, and even considering using philanthropic organizations, which are foundations which are led by Black people. I know I'm doing some work with the Penny Foundation of Birmingham, Alabama, which is one of those community chests that is operating in terms of getting people to give money to a community foundation that's run by people of color.
And it's an important part of the conversation, particularly as philanthropy has grappled with this notion of participatory grant making. Yes. Meaning to figure out how they have folks that are most impacted participate in the grant making process. I actually pushed beyond that, and CoThink wrote this piece around that it can't just be participatory grant making. You can't just ask people, invite them in the process to participate. You have to be actively building power with them.
Exactly.
Build their power to own the direction, the resources to funnel them in a way towards strategies as they move forward.
Yes.
It was very much about sharing power and building power at the same time.
Yes, it's all about power. And that's what we're talking about, the empowerment of communities. So I just want to say thank you, Tracey. We're out of time right now. And I had a million other things I wanted to talk to you, plus go back to some of the things you had stated earlier that I wanted you to expand upon. But we're out of time, but I would love to have you back to continue this conversation.
I would love to continue the conversation. I've told many folks this moment and what is we're being called into doing at this moment has not been fully revealed.
Yes.
So we will all be peeling this away like an onion.
Yes.
In our respective roles, and so I would love to continue the conversation as this moment continues to evolve.
Yes, and we are in an evolutionary process as individuals and as a collective body. And it's great to talk to you today on June 17th, 2020. And I look forward to our next conversation, which I hope will be soon. And thank you for joining me today. You are my first conversation with a video attached to it. So publish you on YouTube as well as on podcasts. So I'm so happy to have you, and thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do.
No, thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for having me.
Good. Hello. Welcome to my podcast about strategies for college success. And I am so happy to have Tracey Greene-Washington with us today of Charlotte, North Carolina. And she has a Bachelor of Science degree as well as an MSW, Master's of Social Work. And I wanted you to tell us, where did you attend college and what degrees did you obtain? And then tell us one piece of advice you would give to college students in terms of being successful in college.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I attended the University of North Carolina, Greensboro for my undergrad degree, where I had the opportunity to get my Bachelor's of Science in Social Work. And then I attended for my master's program, the University of South Carolina, where I was able to achieve my MSW, Master's of Social Work, with a focus and concentration on communities and organizations in Columbia, South Carolina. In terms of my one piece of advice, I probably could give you a lot of different pieces, but I think the one that has served me well and did serve me well was the opportunity to do internships. One of the things that was really beautiful about my program is that they really emphasize the fact that you can have the theoretical component of your work from the academics and what we're teaching you, but having the actual experience in organization with a variety of organizations will serve you well across your career. And so the advice I will give for anybody who is attending college and at either level is to create an intentional plan where you're identifying organizations that you just are curious about and want to learn about and are positioned in just the right way in your sector, your industry, that can give you access to networks, social relational capital, as well as experience that really serves as an important anchoring as you move forward. These internships will provide opportunities for learning. It will help you grow as an individual working in environments environments with multiple people and voices, with multiple folks that have different experiences. And it will also offer opportunities to really build out a real robust, meaty resume as you begin to apply for jobs. And lastly, I would say that the relationships that you build by being in these internships, you can use the social and relational capital to really springboard you to other opportunities as well.
Great piece of advice is doing internships because they're so valuable in allowing you to apply your theory to actually do an application, as well as building relationships and experience. That's great advice. Thank you so much. We appreciate having you.
Thank you.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song, NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.